Something is very wrong at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. For decades, a massive fleet of Nazi submarines sat in a graveyard near Ireland, and everyone thought they were safe. Well, think again. Recent scans have revealed a dark reality that no one saw coming. These boats were supposed to be neutralized, but get this, they are actually more dangerous now than when they were hunting ships.
Nuclear-powered missile submarines became a key part of Western and Soviet deterrence.
From strange chemicals to unstable explosives, the contents of this graveyard are enough to make your skin crawl. What experts found down there is hands down the most disturbing discovery in naval history. Operation Deadlight Truth. Operation Deadlight began in November 1945 and ran through February 1946. The British Royal Navy took charge during a time of massive chaos. Captured U-boats were gathered at Lisa Halley near Londonderry and at Loch Ryan in Scotland. From there, they were towed out into the Atlantic to a designated scuttling zone northwest of Malin Head, Ireland. The plan called for the boats to be sunk in deep water arranged in a rough grid pattern that could theoretically be monitored. But winter in the North Atlantic is unforgiving. The weather was brutal. Many of the U-boats being towed were in poor condition after months of neglect. Hulls that had been designed for combat, not long idle periods, were already corroding. Skeleton crews handled the towing operations and control was difficult. Some boats broke free of their tow lines and sank in unknown locations. Others went down before reaching the designated zone. The official operation logs are incomplete. For a significant number of these submarines, the final resting position was estimated, not confirmed. What was supposed to be an orderly disposal became a scattered mess across miles of ocean floor. And the men running the operation were focused on one thing, getting it done before the next storm hit. What many people don't realize is that speed was the priority, not safety. The thing nobody tells you is what went down with those boats. These submarines did not go into the water empty. Many still carried their torpedo loadouts. Mines sat in their storage racks. Ammunition for deck guns remained aboard. Fuel tanks held thousands of gallons of diesel. Battery compartments contained lead and sulfuric acid. Instrument panels were packed with mercury switches. And the cargo holds of some boats were never fully inspected before they slipped beneath the waves. This was the largest intentional submarine disposal operation in history. Over just a few months, an entire enemy fleet was erased from the surface. The Allies called it a success. The paperwork was filed and then everyone moved on. But those boats were carrying more than just rust into the abyss. While the surface was calm, the contents of these boats were far from empty and safe. The capture of U-234 in May 1945 remains one of the most revealing moments of the entire war. This was a Type 10B mine layer, one of the largest submarine designs in the German fleet. And she was not on a combat patrol, she was on a delivery mission. When the war in Europe ended, U-234 was already at sea, heading for Japan. Her commander received the surrender order and faced a hard choice. He could sink the boat and destroy the evidence, or he could surrender to the Americans. He chose surrender. And when U.S. Navy personnel boarded the submarine and began looking at her cargo, they discovered something that sent shockwaves through the world. The manifest was extraordinary. Stored in her holds were 1,235 pounds of uranium oxide packed into gold-lined cylinders to prevent contamination. This was enough material to potentially fuel multiple atomic weapons, but the uranium was only part of the shipment. U-234 also carried technical drawings for the Me-262 jet fighter, components for rockets, and advanced fuses. There was even an entire disassembled jet aircraft inside. 2 officers from another nation were aboard as experts, but they ended their own journeys rather than be captured. This was not a routine submarine patrol. This was a strategic technology transfer mission. The uranium from U-234 was immediately moved to the secret weapons project in the United States. Historians have debated for decades whether any of it ended up in the bombs used later that year. What is beyond debate is the significance of the capture itself. U-234 proved that Germany had an active program to move nuclear materials by submarine. And here is where the story becomes deeply uncomfortable. U-234 was captured by accident. She surfaced because the war ended. If she had left 2 weeks earlier, she would have reached her goal. If her commander had chosen to sink the boat instead of surrender, we would never have known what she carried. The question that haunts experts today is simple. How many similar missions were never stopped? The scary truth is that other boats might be resting in that graveyard with similar secrets. Unstable sunken munitions. The explosives inside those old torpedoes are not sitting dormant. They are transforming, and the chemistry of that transformation is terrifying. World War II torpedoes used high explosives like TNT and Torpex. These compounds were designed to be stable enough to handle in combat. But that stability had a shelf life. After 80 years submerged in salt water, these explosives have undergone chemical changes that make them far more dangerous than they were during the war. The structures that form as TNT breaks down become increasingly sensitive to shock and friction. Torpex, which contains aluminum powder, can become unpredictable as its parts separate and rot at different rates. The bitter irony is almost hard to believe. A torpedo that might have failed to go off in 1944 could now explode from nothing more than a fishing net hitting it. This is not just a guess. Teams that handle old bombs across Northern Europe see this reality all the time. In the United Kingdom alone, units respond to hundreds of calls every year involving old war weapons pulled from the sea. Fishermen in the North Sea have hauled up live mines and torpedo parts in their nets. Some of these incidents have caused people to run for their lives from harbors. The North Atlantic is not just a graveyard. It is an uncleared minefield, and the scuttling zone sits right in the middle of active fishing waters. Irish and British fishing crews have been dragging their nets across this graveyard for decades. Some have snagged on wreckage and pulled up debris. Every net that drags across a corroded torpedo tube is a roll of the dice. Operation Deadlight was supposed to be the final chapter, a clean ending. Instead, it may have created a poisoned legacy that is only now beginning to reveal itself. The danger is not just from the explosions, but from the invisible poison leaking out. The ordnance is only part of the contamination picture. Those 116 submarines went down carrying a toxic cocktail of industrial materials. Every U-boat had banks of lead-acid batteries in its lower parts containing massive amounts of lead plates and sulfuric acid. Electrical systems and instruments relied on mercury switches, with each submarine carrying several pounds of the liquid metal. Diesel fuel tanks were often still partially full because draining them completely was too slow. As these hulls have rusted over the decades, all of these materials have been slowly leaking into the water. Studies of other wrecks have shown constant poison zones around sunken ships. Near the coast of Norway, the wreck of U-864 was found to be leaking 65 tons of liquid mercury. That single boat caused a massive environmental crisis. The government there spent over $100 million just studying how to fix it. They found that mercury spreads across the seabed and into the fish people eat. This is called bioaccumulation. Small bugs eat the poison, fish eat the bugs, and then those fish end up on dinner plates. Now think about the 116 boats in the Deadlight fleet. Nobody knows how much mercury or lead is leaking out of them because nobody has done a full check. The area is one of the busiest fishing spots in the world. Fishermen depend on these waters to make a living. But if a survey found massive poison levels, the whole industry could be shut down. This creates a dangerous silence. The nets keep dragging, the dice keep rolling, and the wrecks keep rotting away. We are running out of time to understand just how bad it really is. The silent poison is spreading through the ocean while everyone looks the other way. Vanishing submarine graves. The official count for Operation Deadlight stands at 116 submarines. On paper, it is a closed chapter of post-war history, a tidy, bureaucratic liquidation of the Kriegsmarine's remnants, intended to ensure the German underwater fleet would never rise again. But history, when submerged in the volatile and unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic, is rarely as tidy as a ledger. The reality of what lies on the seabed is far messier, obscured by 80 years of salt, silt, and a persistent international apathy that has allowed the truth to drift away from the shore. The discrepancy began almost immediately in the chaotic months following the surrender. In the winter of 1945 and the early weeks of 1946, the logistics of scuttling a massive surrendered fleet were hampered by the very elements the U-boats once used for cover. The North Atlantic winter is a gauntlet of gale-force winds and mountainous swells that make even routine naval operations perilous. Several boats, tethered to their executioners by fraying tow lines, never actually reached the designated deadlight zones. They were claimed by the storms before they could be formally executed, disappearing into the abyss at coordinates that were, at best, educated guesses made by weary sailors in the middle of a gale. Other vessels drifted for miles after their valves were opened or explosive charges were set, carried by powerful undercurrents far from the recorded markers. Decades later, marine archaeologists and commercial surveyors have located many of these iron carcasses, but the ledger remains stubbornly unbalanced. A significant number of submarines on the official list have never been found. They exist in a state of historical limbo, unmarked on any maritime chart, their final resting places known only to the deep currents. Their positions are unknown, and their contents remain a complete mystery, leaving a void where there should be a definitive ending. Where there is a gap in the record, legends inevitably rush in to fill the space. For nearly a century, stories have persisted of ghost boats, vessels that allegedly ignored the order to surrender and vanished into the fog during the confusion of the war's end. The accounting in 1946 was notoriously sloppy, driven by a desire to simply be done with the machinery of death, and no one has performed a truly comprehensive audit in the 8 decades since. But as the gap between official record and physical evidence widens, we must ask, what if the missing boats weren't lost to the storm, but to a deeper, more deliberate design? While most historians dismiss accounts of U-boats fleeing to South America as maritime folklore, the stealth exodus theory suggests a much more sophisticated evasion. Rumors have long swirled around the new Schwabenland project, suggesting that a small, elite percentage of the Type 21 Electroboot fleet, the most advanced submarines of the era, never intended to surrender. These boats were capable of staying submerged for weeks, making them invisible to the primitive radar of the time. If these boats did not sink in the North Atlantic, where are they? Some theorists point to the Silent Corridor, a deep trench route that bypasses traditional shipping lanes. They argue that these missing hulls were not scuttled, but rather used as high-stakes currency. In the desperate scramble for technology at the end of the war, is it possible that a secret submarine for sanctuary program existed, where certain boats were allowed to disappear from the Deadlight manifests in exchange for scientists, gold, or advanced propulsion schematics? The absence of these specific hulls from the ocean floor suggests they may have never been under the British tow lines to begin with. The black cargo and the mercury contamination. Another, perhaps more terrifying theory concerns the cargo of the missing boats. While official records describe the scuttled fleet as stripped and empty, subsequent dives on known wrecks have occasionally revealed unexpected contents. This has fueled the black cargo hypothesis, the idea that the missing Deadlight boats were used as deep-sea disposal units for the Third Reich's most dangerous experiments. Recent, unauthorized sonar sweeps of the Irish Shelf have detected anomalous density readings within certain unidentified hulls, readings consistent with heavy metals like mercury or lead-lined canisters. If these boats were carrying chemical agents or even early-stage radiological materials, their loss at sea might not have been an accident. Instead, it could have been a deliberate, deep sixing of evidence that neither the Allies nor the surrendering Germans wanted the public to find. The mystery of the missing coordinates then becomes a matter of national security rather than maritime history. The locations are not lost, they are redacted. Perhaps the wildest, yet most persistent theory among deep-sea salvors is the Sentinel Protocol. This theory suggests that a handful of U-boats were outfitted with experimental, long-term preservation technologies, possibly anaerobic environments designed to protect the integrity of the crew or sensitive biological assets for decades. Followers of this theory point to unusual acoustic pings recorded by SOSUS, Sound Surveillance System, during the Cold War. These pings, originating from the Deadlight zones, didn't match biological patterns or known seismic activity. They sounded rhythmic, mechanical, like the automated venting of a hull or the cycling of an ancient internal pump. Could a missing boat be sitting on a ledge of the continental shelf, its system still ticking in a state of low-power hibernation, waiting for a signal that will never come? It sounds like science fiction, Yet the sheer number of unaccounted-for hulls makes the buried alive scenario a haunting possibility for those who map the dark. Today, we possess the most sophisticated deep-sea technology in human history, yet it remains unused in this context. Autonomous underwater robots, AUVs, can map the ocean floor with millimetric precision, and side-scan sonar can identify the silhouette of a conning tower through hundreds of meters of darkness without a single diver ever entering the water. We have the tools to see if these boats are leaking toxic fluids, or if they are carrying secret, sensitive cargo that was never recorded in the surrender manifests. But there is no international plan to do the work. The political landscape is defined by a stalemate of indifference. Ireland monitors the waters within its own jurisdiction, but lacks the massive funding required for deep ocean surveys. The United Kingdom views the matter as a settled historical footnote with no current priority, and Germany maintains the position that the wrecks are no longer their sovereign responsibility. This jurisdictional no-man's land is exactly where the most controversial boats are thought to lie. As long as no one looks, the secrets remain buried, and no government is forced to deal with the environmental or political fallout of what might be discovered inside a missing hull. The corrosion clock, a race against time. The North Atlantic is a place of profound, crushing silence, but beneath the swells, a violent chemical war is reaching its final act. For more than 8 decades, the remnants of Operation Deadlight, the massive post-war scuttling of the German U-boat fleet, have rested in the cold, anaerobic depths. But the chemistry of the ocean is patient, and its work is relentless. Steel, no matter how storied or fearsome, does not last forever in salt water. We are now entering a critical structural window where the physics of the deep and the chemistry of corrosion are converging to erase the 20th century's most enigmatic artifacts. Marine biologists and deep-sea engineers refer to this looming threshold as the collapse phase. For 80 years, the integrity of these hulls has largely held, protected by a delicate balance of pressure and a slow rate of oxidation in the frigid dark. But rust is not a linear process. It is a cumulative one. As the iron is slowly replaced by fragile rusticles and the structural lattice of the steel thins, the massive weight of the Atlantic begins to win. The transition from a recognizable wreck, a vessel that still looks like it could sail through a ghost story, to a flattened debris field is often sudden, violent, and entirely irreversible. When these hulls finally fail, the consequences will ripple far beyond the loss of historical silhouettes. As the outer casings succumb to the relentless bite of corrosion, the internal compartments, sealed for nearly a century, will implode. This collapse phase threatens to release a toxic cocktail into the North Atlantic ecosystem. We are talking about residual fuel oil, heavy metals like mercury used in depth-sensing equipment, and tons of unexploded ordnance that has become increasingly unstable with age. The seabed, once a graveyard, could easily become a source of modern ecological catastrophe. Yet, for the historian and the investigator, the stakes are even higher. The historical evidence contained within these iron tombs is currently being crushed. In the deep, there are likely airless pockets where paper, logbooks, and personal effects may have survived the decades, preserved by the lack of oxygen. If the persistent theories regarding black cargo, the whispered accounts of high-value plunder, experimental technology, or classified documents moved in the war's final days, hold any weight, that evidence is currently being eaten away by the very pressure that has protected it for nearly a century. We are living in the final years where these boats can be studied as intact historical artifacts. The integrity that held for the first 80 years will certainly not hold for another 80, and right now, almost no one is watching the clock. The North Atlantic is not just a graveyard, it is a giant pressurized vault containing the unanswered questions of the 20th century. To understand the urgency, one must look at the official records of Operation Deadlight. Between November 1945 and February 1946, the British Royal Navy scuttled 116 of the 156 U-boats that had surrendered. But the records are riddled with inconsistencies. Why were some boats reported as scuttled, when modern side-scan sonar shows no debris field exists at their recorded coordinates? Why do certain modern naval exercises still quietly avoid the so-called Deadlight ghost zones, despite these areas being officially empty on every public chart? There is a growing realization among maritime archaeologists that the official count may be wrong. The final truth of Operation Deadlight, the exact number of hulls, the nature of their cargo, and the reality of the boats that supposedly vanished during the towing process, is still waiting in the dark. Some boats were reported to have foundered in heavy seas before reaching the scuttling grounds, but the locations of their sinking remain suspiciously vague. These are the vanishing graves, the ships that slipped away into the deep before the victors could properly inventory their contents. As the sea finally grinds the iron evidence into dust, we are losing our last chance to distinguish between maritime myth and a darker submerged reality. There is a specific kind of mourning that comes with the loss of a wreck. It is the permanent closing of a book before the final chapter has been read. The ghost fleet may be silent, but its presence is a reminder that some chapters of history refuse to be buried, even by the weight of the entire Atlantic Ocean. We are witnessing the slow-motion implosion of a mystery. The Deadlight ghost zones remain an anomaly that modern science is only beginning to probe. Sailors and sonar technicians speak of false bottoms and thermal layers that seem to mask large metallic masses where only silt should be. Are these merely the echoes of the collapse phase, or are they the silhouettes of the boats that weren't supposed to be there? We are running out of time to find these graves before they become indistinguishable from the seabed itself. Once the hulls flatten and the silt moves in, the North Atlantic will have finished its work. We will be left with nothing but the echoes of a mystery we were too hesitant, or perhaps too afraid, to solve. The clock is ticking in the depths, measured in the steady rhythmic pulse of salt eating through steel. What is still hiding down there in the dark? Could a forgotten cargo change our history forever? Let us know your thoughts below. Please like and subscribe for more deep-sea mysteries. Does the government owe us the truth about these underwater bombs?